The general relativity theory has created new physical conditions, but there is a lack of a coherent model connecting these to reality as we perceive it. That quote is from Albert Einstein, who was highlighting the gap between the mathematical elegance of his theory relative to observable, testable evidence in reality. You see, even Albert Einstein himself knew his theory was trash. However, for some magical and mystical reason, the theory of relativity is now the only theory that is allowed to be discussed and studied and pursued when it comes to trying to figure out what is going on in our universe, or essentially in all of reality. We have a serious problem. We have a monumental issue when it comes to understanding physics, cosmology, and everything else that surrounds this. And the main problem that we currently face is this disgusting worship of relativity theory. Now, I get it. Right now, if you're about to shut this off because you're like, oh boy, here's more schizo stuff. Relativity was thought up by a brilliant man. And of course, everybody since then has latched onto it and they just keep proving it, right? I mean, we could not possibly have a completely wrong theory embedded in mainstream academia driving all of what we currently consider science. Of course we could. Absolutely we could. Why wouldn't we be able to do that? I mean, why do you think that couldn't happen? What, do you honestly believe that smart people can't be tricked into doing and believing dumb garbage? Of course they can. Absolutely. Never forget, it was scientifically proved decades ago, probably centuries ago if you really want to get into it, that the smarter you are, the easier it is to psychologically control you. There is no way around this. And this is exactly what has been done to our society. Now it gets worse, because the next question you should also be asking is, what the hell does the theory of relativity have to do with the study of ancient history? It has everything to do with it. The theory of relativity, while in and of itself has a ton of problems, and that's kind of out of scope for this talk anyways, but what it does do is that it highlights 2 points and gives us 2 examples, extreme examples, of what is going on right now with respect to our understanding of history and our understanding of science. Now, the science part is easy to understand. If, for some weird reason, the mainstream is pushing a theory which is inherently wrong, which relativity is, then that means that anybody pursuing that particular course of science is quite literally wasting their time. Even better if there's essentially almost no benefit that you could ever pull out of that theory, just like relativity, for example. If it's a total, wild goose chase, what that means is that you grab people in the public, you take intellectuals or people who are generally geared towards those kinds of sciences, and you entertain their brains with garbage. What that means is that you can take them and put them to the side, and they will no longer be a problem to you if you are trying to hide the truth. The other aspect that relativity highlights for us is the fact that history is also being obfuscated because our history is not boring and dull the way the mainstream tells it. Right now, we have thousands of years of civilizations that just kind of, walk around, bump into each other, build temples, scratch their butts, and, kind of fight each other. But otherwise, it's not really all that eventful. Now, this is a weird perspective because when we look back at everybody's ancient histories, we find a situation to where all ancient cultures are talking about horrific, catastrophic events taking place on this planet. Now, mainstream history ignores this because mainstream historians, just like mainstream scientists, believe in a completely garbage way of thinking. Both schools of thought have been corrupted and their efforts have been diverted into directions which will never bring about the truth. Now, okay, what am I talking about? What's even going on in this show? So, what I want to do today is I want to highlight, like, just throw it out there and let's be honest. I want to show all of the horrific stuff that is currently believed right now in the mainstream that is altering everybody's perception with respect to history and science. And because our perceptions are being altered and being focused in directions which are completely frivolous, I mean, they're completely wrong, they're completely garbage. What this is doing is this is creating a dissociative state in your average person, and once you achieve a dissociative psychological state in a person or in a community or a society or a population, you then have the opportunity to gain control over the minds of that population. And that is exactly what has been going on with respect to history and science. I only started the show with relativity theory because right now the vast majority of the public believes that relativity theory is actually the answer to a lot of the major questions that we have as humans, right? I mean, this goes into the formation of the universe, or I should say the creation of the universe. We have the Big Bang situation going on. Relativity has its hand in that. And of course, born from all of that kind of stuff, relativity then posits all kind of weird abstractions, like a black hole, for example, whatever the hell that is. And even Einstein called it out. The second Einstein actually noticed that his equations led to the concept of a black hole, even he was like, wait a second, something has got to be wrong, right? Something is going on. Now, of course, later on, Schwarzschild would come in with his solution to try to, figure it out for Einstein. And of course, it's all just equations. There's nothing actual, physical reality around any of this stuff. And again, Einstein called that out. Einstein, as far as I'm aware, never looked at Schwarzschild's solutions as anything more than a mathematical curiosity. He was never like, oh yeah, this dude totally figured out the physical reality of a black hole. There you go, you guys. Let's go with this. Einstein was critical of his own theory, and as he should have been, because that's what we're supposed to do as scientists. But what happened, right? That's not what happened with relativity, though, is it? Relativity got pushed to the forefront as purely factual, and all science would have to be based on relativity from there on out. What the hell is going on? We faced the exact same problem in ancient history as well. It was only like, 500-ish years ago or so to where anybody actually tried to build up a worldwide chronology that we could start basing the backbone of all of history on, right? And that would have been with Scaliger and Petavius. Those two guys essentially built up what we consider nowadays as the hard, factual history. And you are not allowed to go against their history either. The ironic part about that is that both of those guys actually had misgivings about some of the stuff that even they were doing. And of course, to make it even worse, both of those guys were operating under some pretty malicious pretenses anyways. But, after a few centuries, that just became the law, just like relativity has become the law in science. So when we are trying to figure out what the hell happened in our past, and we are trying to get an understanding of our current reality, how are we ever going to do that if all of the stuff that we base all of our thought processes on right now are all fundamentally flawed? This is the problem that every single one of us are suffering from right now when it comes to trying to figure out history and science. Now, looking back at relativity and Einstein, there's something I want to go over so that we can try and gain an understanding of what is going on right now in our society, so that we can start to work around some of this absolutely malicious stuff that is going on and that is getting in the way of us trying to figure out what actually happened in the past. So Einstein's relativity is interesting, not just because the theory itself is weird. And I'm not saying every single principle in there is wrong. That's not the case. but there are a lot of concepts in it that are. For example, like I just said, the concept of black holes, it's weird. It's not right. It's a singularity. Even Einstein himself said singularities cannot exist in nature. And so far as we know right now, that's correct, right? We have no reason to believe there is anything like a singularity in nature. We've never seen it. And I know for the smart asses out there right now, you can say, but I mean, bro, they proved that there's black holes in the middle of our galaxies, right? I mean, no, they haven't proved anything. The only thing that's in the middle of our galaxy is a plasmoid. We've proved that, right? Remember, don't forget, we proved, and this was known a while ago, that Birkeland currents power our galaxy. Galaxies are powered externally. In the middle of a galaxy is a large plasmoid. That's what's going on in there, and that's why you see what you see relative to a galaxy. A galaxy's shape is dictated by the Birkeland current. A Birkeland current is a real, physical, scientific fact. There is no way around this. You do not need black holes. And of course, for the ultra mainstream smug person, you will of course bring up space-time. Space-time is an aspect of relativity, and it's a concept which is ridiculous. Remember, space-time is nothing more than an abstraction. There is no fabric in space. You cannot touch it, you cannot warp it. It does not exist. Space-time is nothing more than an abstraction put into the equations to make the theory work. That is all it is. Remember, relativity is nothing more than a bunch of theoretical equations strung together to try to make this crazy theory actually hold any kind of water. And it does when you are using equations. The problem with relativity, of course, is that when you try to apply it to reality, everything falls apart. That is why you constantly see astronomers nowadays, scratching their heads wondering why stars are not following relativity theory or stars are not following the theory of gravity and all that crap, right? None of that is working out observationally because relativity is wrong. Now, the interesting part about that is that real science, right then and there, the stuff that even NASA is doing themselves, is literally proving relativity wrong. But if you'll notice, not a single one of these guys wants to let it go. Relativity has to be real. And the reason why relativity has to be real is because everybody has been trained their entire lives that it's real. You are not allowed to go against it. Even worse, if you go against the theory of relativity, what happens to you socially, right? You are immediately going to be excommunicated from any kind of a university or potentially jobs. You are going to be frowned upon by general academic society. You're essentially going to become an outcast. Like that is what happens if you do what you're supposed to do in science. Question the science. That is literally what we are supposed to do with it. I don't know what is going on. Like, why is this so complicated? I don't care what your scientific principle is. It is our job to continue to question it. You don't ever stop. I don't care how much it seems like a law. Like, it doesn't matter. You continue to question it because if you stop questioning it, that means that you believe that you know everything 100%. And let's be honest, at this point in time, we know for a fact that we do not know everything. So questioning a theory like relativity should be welcomed. And people who have done that have been ostracized. Now, that's not how we do science. That's not how we're supposed to approach this stuff. We have the same problem in history too, don't we? And we'll get to that in just a sec. I'm still ranting on relativity and science. Okay, so if we find ourselves in a situation to where the main theory that modern society uses to substantiate all of their claims is wrong, and it's right in front of our face wrong, why the hell is everybody still holding on to it? What's going on? Well, remember what I said earlier is that what has happened to society, especially nowadays, with the internet and all of this psychological programming constantly being forced down our throats, is that the message that relativity is real and is correct has been repeated so often and so ingrained by the power structure into our society that people no longer even know that they can question the concept of the theory. It does not even cross their minds. If you're not going to question something in a scientific venue, then you're no longer doing science. But this is the situation we find ourselves in now. So how did we get to this point? How did we get to a point to where otherwise intelligent people now believe and run their lives off of a complete lie? How do you get there? Well, the Einstein thing is interesting because if we go back in time and if we look when relativity gained its popularity and how it gained its popularity, this is actually an extremely important insight that we can use to then apply to other historical events so that we can start to gain a real scientific understanding of the level of fraud, forgery, and outright lying that has been done to mainstream history and science. In the early 1900s, Einstein published his paper called On the Electrodynamics of Moving Bodies. And yeah, that's kind of an ironic title for the paper, but okay, I'm not going to talk about that. Anyway, he published that paper and nobody really paid attention to it right off the bat. And that's pretty normal, especially back then. Could you imagine going through all of that crap? I mean, a lot of people were publishing stuff back then, so anyway. Then, of course, later on, in somewhere around 1915 to 1919, eventually the general theory of relativity is published. Once that gets out there, once again, okay, people kind of look at it, but it's not adopted yet, until Arthur Eddington's stupid little expedition where he was watching the sunlight, quote unquote, bend around the sun during a solar eclipse. This is basically what set Einstein's theory into the public's mind. And this event would essentially ruin all of future science and historical work because now everything has to be based on relativity. And if your theory or if your idea or concept or whatever disagrees with relativity, it will immediately be discarded, at least by the mainstream. So that's a problem, right? All right, but it's funny. Arthur Eddington's expedition, there's a problem, though, right off the bat. Because I know people right now are thinking, oh, yeah, that's... Okay, well, what was going on is that Arthur Eddington essentially proved what is called gravitational lensing. And the idea with gravitational lensing is this. Essentially, what happens is that, a star is so massive that when light, approaches the star from a particular area, the gravity of the star would warp the path of the light, and then you would find that the light would basically bend around the star. So you would get kind of a curve with the light. Or in this case, what Arthur Eddington saw through his telescope was that he saw stars that should not have been being able to have been seen. Did I say that right? Basically, he was seeing stars that should have been behind the sun, but he saw them right at the edge of the sun instead. So what that meant to him, and of course to, relativity and stuff, is that the light from the star behind the sun was being bent around the sun, which meant that the fabric of space-time must be real, and now everybody started to believe in relativity. That's basically what set off that whole situation. Now, gravitational lensing is also stupid. It's not gravitational lensing. It's just refraction. That's all it is. Now, if you're not familiar with refraction of light basically all it is when a light ray passes from one medium to another medium that has a different optical density. For example, if you ever take a pen or a pencil or something and you stick it in a glass of water, you'll notice that the pencil or pen will look like it's bent. That's refraction, all right? So there's no gravitational lensing taking place within that cup or that glass. It's just a simple optical illusion. That's the exact same thing that happened when this experiment that they ran tried to say that, oh yes, relativity is real and this proves it, when it proved nothing. I mean, that's not what it is. So here's the problem with the mainstream stuff. They use these kinds of garbage experiments to do one thing and one thing only. And that's prove what they want to prove. They did not even consider the possibility of refraction being the explanation for what they are witnessing, or what they were witnessing at the time. All they wanted to do was prove a specific theory. And once they were able to do that, once they were able to essentially collect data that looked like it supported the theory, they were done. They didn't try the experiment again with any other kinds of thought processes. They just took that and they said, hey, relativity is now proved by our observational evidence. When the reality is the opposite was true. The experiment did not prove relativity as the only theory that could possibly have existed. Now, I know I'm ragging on relativity still. I know I'm probably just mumbling at this point. Actually, I don't even remember what the hell this show was supposed to be about. Now I'm just pissed. So, when scientists approach experimentation like this, what are we supposed to do with that? Why should we trust scientists who are only focused on proving one theory instead of just trying to prove reality? You know, we ran into the same problem with the Michelson-Morley experiment. That was another experiment that was done that was, basically essentially done to prove Einstein correct in that it was an attempt to try and disprove the ether theory. What they did is they tried to see if they could see if the ether was there or not. So they ran an experiment, and their experiment results proved to them that there was no such thing as an ether. And of course, once again, the problems with the experiment were completely ignored. The Michelson-Morley experiment was completely inaccurate anyways, because the tools and the technology that they had at the time that they were using to measure the drift of ether, they were so pathetic that there was no way they were ever going to achieve any results anyways. Not only that, but they didn't take into other considerations with respect to the orbit of the Earth, and on top of that, the experiment was not tested and retested and retested like you are supposed to do if you are going to make a claim such as there is no such thing as an ether. None of that stuff was done. So the Michelson-Morley experiment was also used as evidence to substantiate Einstein. So it's funny when you go right now and you look at, mainstream physicists and all of these guys, they don't care. They trust the old school experiments being 100% accurate, and they are making no effort to retest any of the experiments, just to double check to see if it's correct. And at the very least, these guys should do it anyways, because we have better technology now that would, obviously give us more precise results. So you would think these guys would be jumping off the roof trying to do these kinds of experiments, simply because they might prove even more stuff. Nobody does any of this. All right. So anyways, our system is plagued with inaccurate theories that are believed to be fact. This concept also translates over to our understanding of ancient history. Now, I know, I ran it for like 12 hours on relativity, but I wanted to set the stage to show everybody right up front that right in the world you live in right now, there are highly intelligent people who believe in outright lies. Not only do they believe in the lies, but they'll teach the lies. They will defend the lies. They will go to their grave believing a lie is real, despite all of the information, the scientific information that they have right in front of them. Mainstream historians suffer the exact same problem. And, it's something that pretty much all of us are going to end up suffering as well. It's funny, the relativity thing, a lot of people out there actually can look at the relativity thing, look at the evidence, and at least say, hey, all right, it is a theory. Maybe there's something better. Now, most people are not going to dig beyond that, but I'll give people credit. A lot of people are willing to say that, hey, maybe something else is going on. Hell, even Einstein was not in agreement with this theory. Hell, what's even funnier? Oh, yeah, let's set the stage for history like this. Einstein was friends with Immanuel Velikovsky. Now, Velikovsky was a hardcore historian, and he took kind of a different approach into trying to explain, existence as a whole. He really didn't buy into the whole relativity situation, and he told Einstein that, right? And Einstein and him would argue about this back and forth. You can go and read some of their letters to one another. But Einstein was on board with his theory more or less. So while Velikovsky's stuff was interesting to him, he did not just, blindly buy into it and all of that, which is fine. Saying, you still need evidence for stuff. But what Velikovsky was advocating for, basically, was essentially that electromagnetism played a larger role in the structure of the universe. And not only did it do that, but Immanuel Velikovsky, as far as I'm aware, he was the first person to really put together what was going on with respect to ancient history and what our ancestors recorded, and mix that with some kind of a science like electromagnetism. When he did that, all of a sudden, history started to make more sense. Now, him and Einstein would bat back and forth about some of this stuff. And like I said, initially, Einstein, he wanted proof. He wasn't on board. What's interesting to note is that at the end of Einstein's life, he was starting to agree with Immanuel Velikovsky. The reason why I wanted to set the stage like this is because for those people who believe hardcore relativity is real, it's very much important to understand that even the creator of the theory was not on board with his own theory towards the end of his life, and in fact was actually starting to believe in a completely different point of view. Now, the Einstein thing is also fascinating relative to why he got where he got and how his theory was embedded into the mainstream. Yeah, let's talk about this too. Okay, I know it's like a side note, but whatever. Okay, this is now a schizo babble because I don't know where I'm going anymore. So, Einstein's theory of relativity got embedded into society. If we have enough evidence to show that it is not correct and that there's no real reason to use relativity to, be the foundation of all of our sciences, it begs the question, why is this being pushed so hard? And that's the key, really. The fact that relativity was pushed as hard as it was pushed in the mainstream is kind of a weird situation. I don't think a lot of people truly appreciate how weird it is that all of a sudden the mainstream press, the mainstream media back in the day, when Einstein was, first coming out with this whole situation, why did they grab onto this theory and start just promoting it everywhere? One of the first rules that you learn when it comes to social conditioning or social engineering is that you need to have control over the media. Because if you have control over the media, you have control over the ability to essentially inject information into the public constantly. Now, when you're trying to psychologically condition somebody, repetition is key. Control over what they see, hear, smell, etc. is all key. Once you have control over as many of the senses that you do, and you can control what kind of information is being fed into that person or that society, what you can do then is you can direct that society's growth into a very specific direction. That is exactly what happened with relativity. The question that we need to ask is why? Now, on the surface of things, nowadays, a lot of Westerners really do believe that they live in some kind of an enlightened utopia where we are all hyper intelligent and much better than all of our ancestors in the past. Everybody, 200 years ago back, they're all monkeys. Us today, we just know much better nowadays. We have the internet. We can look up anything we want. Everything is better. Religion is kind of going away. We are just so much more advanced than the monkeys that were our ancestors. And what we're starting to now learn is that the exact opposite is true. Now, a lot of people don't want to hear that still, because most people really are still embedded into the mainstream zeitgeist. And that includes religious people as well. Even religious people really do feel like they are enlightened. Like nowadays, a lot of religious people, Christians, Catholics, etc., they won't read their Bibles as legitimately as they should. For example, a lot of people will now look at the deluge and they'll say, well, I mean, it probably was not, the entire earth being flooded with tons of water. It was probably really just a bad local flood in the Middle East or something, and they wrote about it. Whatever. See, but that's the kind of cope that even religious people are on now. And the reason why we've gotten people to this point is because the media has forced, or I'm not even going to say the media, just the general power structure that currently rules over Western society has forced all of these kinds of viewpoints down our throats for the past century or so. And now everybody has been brought up to believe that this is the right direction to go. Now, when I say everybody, I don't mean everybody. There's still good people out there who are much smarter and much more, I guess you could use the term red-pilled if you want, who understand what's going on. But the vast majority of us are affected, and there's no way around that. Okay, I know, still rambling. Anyways, why did the powers that be grab onto relativity and force that down the throats of everybody as if it was like the second coming of Jesus or whatever, right? Because that's what they did with that. When was the last time you saw a scientific principle be promoted like that? We can maybe argue that string theory has kind of been promoted like that. String theory is trash, by the way, absolute trash. Quantum theory has kind of been promoted like that, but there's some usefulness to quantum theory. There's a lot of quantum theory that is also garbage, by the way. Quantum theory is not the correct way to go. And don't listen to me on that. You can go listen to real quantum physicists tell you straight up and show you the evidence that shows you guys that, hey, no, we need to not take this in the direction that it's currently going in the mainstream. So even quantum theory has a problem. So why do we have a situation to where the media is forcing all of these technically incorrect sciences down our throat? Well, the answer is simple. It's all about divide and conquer. It is all about being diverted away from the truth. One of the things that a lot of people do not realize that has happened in the Western world is that, I'll just use the term the government, but it's worse than that. The government has essentially made certain lines of science impossible to study. Not only impossible, but, if we're honest, almost illegal. Now, I'm not going to go too deep into that because that's a whole other show and that's a whole other situation. But it's not very hard to find instances of people who have been studying certain sciences, which the mainstream has demonized. And when those people start to make headway in those sciences, let's just say, and I'll use the generic term, let's just say anti-gravity, okay, just for fun. When somebody in that kind of a field of research makes headway, those people suddenly are demonized, they lose their jobs, and a lot of the times they suddenly disappear. Now, does that mean they were killed or executed or whatever? Maybe that's possible, but we also know that those people will be hired on under certain kinds of companies, and their research will be transferred to those institutions. And then suddenly you will not see any more papers. There will not be any more demonstrations. It's very common. What this means objectively, right? If we apply the scientific method to what we are seeing with how the government does the stuff that it does with new discoveries, all we have to do is look at the evidence and we can conclusively say that the current route that we are on right now in the mainstream relative to scientific discoveries is objectively wrong. To make matters worse, the media promotes objectively wrong information and makes sure that people believe that it's real. The reason why this is being done is so that your average person, even if you're a highly intelligent person, even if you're one of those people, 170 IQ, 10 million degrees, whatever, even you will be fooled ultimately into following a fool's errand when it comes to trying to advance any kind of real science. And that's the situation that we find with relativity. It's very interesting that during this period of time, scientists they weren't working on relativity. What were they working on during this period of time? Everybody was working with electromagnetism. Everybody was starting to go in the direction of understanding electricity. Right? This is where Christian Birkeland came out of. This is where he came out of and literally proved what powers stars and ultimately what powers the earth and what ultimately makes everything rotate and all of that stuff. I mean, this dude did all of that during this time with electromagnetism, with electricity. The key is electricity. And a lot of physicists, or I'll just say scientists in general, they were going in that direction. You don't have to believe me. Just go look about what's going on in the late 1800s and the early 1900s. This was the direction science was going. This is the correct direction because that direction, as we are starting to relearn now, is the correct path. However, for some weird reason, the correct path was not chosen back in the early 1900s, and instead, relativity was promoted, forced down everybody's throats, and now that is what dominates mainstream academia. But that is a lie. That theory does not work, and we know it does not work. So the only reason why a theory like that would be promoted is that if somebody up in a high place of power already understood the truth, was potentially already working with the truth, and wanted to make sure that the real science, the actual real science that could have benefited you, me, and everybody on the planet, was not investigated and built upon by the masses. Instead, now we have everybody wasting hundreds of millions and trillions and billions of dollars doing dumb stuff like the LHC, right? Looking for the magical Higgs boson. That, it's the dumbest stuff you can imagine. But all of this effort, all of these resources are being poured into an objectively incorrect direction. The only conclusion that we can come to when we see this stuff is that, yeah, somebody does know what's real. There is somebody up there that has a good idea and is probably using it right now to their advantage about what is actually running the universe, and they're exploiting this power, and they're using it for their own gain and their own ability for control. We can come to that conclusion scientifically just by looking at the evidence. Maybe we'll do that in another show just for fun. And I know I'm still rambling. I know I get it. Okay. But that's where we're at. That's what happened with relativity. That is what is going on with the social engineering. Right now, the vast majority of people believe in a scientific lie. Now, this is where history comes into play, and back to Immanuel Velikovsky. So when somebody like Immanuel Velikovsky starts to use real science, and that guy made predictions in which NASA proved, and they never gave Velikovsky any credit for all of the predictions he made scientifically that NASA would eventually approve. They do that all the time, right? Like Halton Arp's another good one they don't give credit to. Christian Birkeland as well, right? Christian Birkeland. Then there's the whole solar wind, hilarious phenomenon. Okay, anyway. Here's the problem. When somebody like Velikovsky comes up and says, hey, look, we actually do know what's going on, and what's even more interesting is that our ancestors in the past appear to have recorded catastrophic events which would subsequently prove the theory that electromagnetism and electricity brings to the table. So what that means then is that our ancestors were not stupid monkeys. Our ancestors were literally recording real events that can be proven by real, testable science. I have a feeling that there is somebody at the very top of the power structure on this planet that does not want us to look in that direction. Immanuel Velikovsky was attacked, demonized, and absolutely beaten down by the system because he pursued this line of thought. Einstein, at the end of his life, literally died with Immanuel Velikovsky's book on his desk, open. You, we, me, we are being lied to. Now, what does this have to do with history? Well, it has everything to do with history because history is science. Don't ever let a historian tell you otherwise. They always try to play that stupid game like, well, I can't really prove anything scientifically because history isn't really a science that you can use the scientific method against and, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you can. Of course, history is a science. History is a factual event that took place at some point in time in the past. In theory, we should be able to prove that. And that even if we can't, actually technically prove it, because there's a lot of problems, right? I mean, it is something that happened in the past. It's difficult to get the evidence, etc., etc. But that does not mean we do not try. We do not just sit back and just give up and say, oh, it's too hard, bro. I can't just do it. I have to use science. No, I'm going to go read the history book that Professor Shlomo gave me, and I'm just going to go off of that. That's what they do. We can't do that. That's not how that works. Immanuel Velikovsky brought science into ancient history. This is a problem for historians because now all of a sudden, all of that crazy stuff that all of our ancestors recorded back in the day is now suddenly not fantastical in a fictional sense, but it is now possible in a scientific sense. And of course, if all of the stuff that we are now learning is true, and by that I mean all of the different planetary catastrophes that have taken place in the past, few thousand years, upwards of 10 to 20,000 years. I don't have exact dates. Chronology is a bitch, and I've covered that. And we have a lot more to cover, by the way. But what that shows is that whatever we are as humans, whatever life is on Earth, whatever's going on right now, there's more to it. There's a lot more to it. Right? It's not a simple thing like, oh yeah, relativity and everything takes millions and billions of years. Oh yeah, evolution, everything takes millions and billions of years. All of that stuff is designed to throw everybody off. Don't forget, I don't believe in God. I'm not a young earth creationist, okay? So I'm not promoting some kind of religious garbage either. God people are just as crazy as any kind of person that believes in relativity nowadays. But if we are going to actually be enlightened and we are going to actually act on academic and intellectual honesty, we have to admit that something else is going on. So when we look at history, we find the exact same garbage going on with history, just like we find with science and relativity. Right now, nowadays, we have an entire timeline already set up for us, and there is never going to be a paradigm shift that is going to be allowed to alter that timeline. If that is not allowed, what that means is that anybody in that high level of position of power quite literally controls what you understand about the past relative to yourself and your ancestors. If they are able to separate you psychologically from your ancestral rights, from your ancestral origins, they can then rewrite them and they can actually mold you into something else. And that is exactly what has happened. And that is what we have to deal with when we start to look at ancient history. I know a lot of this stuff on this channel seems insane, but every single video that I have on this channel is related to one another. There is no separation. When I talk about psychological programming, that is directly related to Saturn theory. When I talk about Saturn theory, that is directly related to, say, some kind of a chronological situation in Egypt, etc., etc. Everything we're talking about on this channel is connected and is building up one huge picture. The problem is, of course, that the picture that we are starting to build up here is 100% different than what we have been taught. When we run into information that is different and that goes against the grain of what we have been taught, what happens, right? Psychological borders, or walls, I should say, barriers. They immediately pop up, and this kind of stuff will be immediately discarded, even though it's backed up by nothing but real science and real history. That's just the reality of something we have to deal with, and it's something to keep an eye out for. Okay. Well, I don't even know what the hell I'm talking about anymore. I'm just like complaining about the government, all conspiracied out and stuff. Okay. When we go to look at this, I don't even know what the hell I'm talking about anymore. I'll shut this down. My point is, from all of this stuff, when we look at history or science, don't forget that we don't have answers to a lot of stuff, and a lot of the stuff that we think we have answers to, even the discoverers of that information, you might find actually doubt that direction that their discovery took society. Right? Einstein is a perfect example. Unfortunately, historically, or I should say historians, I can't think of a good example of a historian who has looked back on his career and thought, wait a second. You know, all of that stuff that I said about 3 Roman empires existing, maybe that's all wrong. Actually, maybe it really is only one Roman empire. I don't think I've really run into a historian that's done that. You know, and the reason why is probably because historians can get away with it, right? Nobody questions their zeitgeist on the level that you can question, you know, something like relativity, say. You know, it becomes very difficult to question a historian simply because the level of power they now have with respect to owning the timeline is just tremendous. And people don't want to give up that power, right? Jesus. I don't even know what the hell I'm talking about. I'm going to shut this down, right? And I've complained about, relativity, history, the government. Okay, yeah. I didn't throw aliens in there because we don't need to throw aliens in there. Isn't that amazing? We don't need aliens in any of this stuff right now. Not that I'm saying they don't exist. I'm just saying that we don't always have to run towards the alien thing to get, yeah, we just don't have to. Okay, all right. Now I'm suddenly talking about aliens. What the hell is going on?